By 1206, one man had devised a use for human beings that no military commander before him had systematized so efficiently. Not as laborers, not as servants, as ammunition. Genghis Khan's armies did not simply take slaves, they deployed them. Captive men were marched to the front of siege lines so that defenders on the walls faced an impossible choice: fire on the advancing Mongols and kill their own countrymen, or hold their arrows and let the enemy close the distance. Either way, the Mongols advanced. Either way, the defenders lost something, ground or their own people, before the battle had properly begun. The Persian historian Malik Juvayni, who travelled with the Mongol court in the 13th century and witnessed its administration firsthand, documented this tactic during the campaign against the Khwarezm Empire in 1219. Prisoners taken from Bukhara, men who had surrendered peacefully, who had been told their lives would be spared, were driven at spear point toward the walls of the next city. They carried earth and timber under arrow fire to fill in the defensive moats. They pushed siege equipment forward, while Mongol engineers directed from behind. When the arrows came from the walls, it was the prisoners who took them. Juvayni called it, in the careful language of a man who served the people he was describing, the practice of using captives to spare Mongol soldiers. The captives had no word for it. They were not asked. This was not the worst thing the Mongol slave system produced. It was the introduction. If you're into Mongol history, kindly tell us what Mongol's history you would like us to cover next. And don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. The cities of Khwarezm fell in a specific order, and that order was not accidental. Each city's survivors were the instrument used to take the next one. When Bukhara fell in February 1220, Genghis Khan divided the population by the Yasa's standard categories. Craftsmen were separated and roped together for the march east. Soldiers were executed or conscripted. The remainder, tens of thousands of civilians, were driven into the plain outside the city. From this group, Mongol commanders selected the men they needed for the next phase of the campaign. Those men were issued nothing. No weapons, no armor, no food beyond what kept them walking. They were organized into columns and marched towards Samarkand, the next target, alongside the Mongol army. When the army reached the city's outer walls, the captives were pushed to the front. Juvayni describes the scene at Samarkand in March 1220 with the precision of someone who had been told about it by people who were there. The defenders on the walls looked down at the approaching mass and saw, at its leading edge, faces they recognized. People from Bukhara, merchants, craftsmen, farmers, people from a city they knew, a city that had already fallen, people who were now walking toward them, not as soldiers, but as a living barrier. The Mongol commanders behind them were shielded. The moats needed to be filled before the siege towers could advance. The captives carried the earth to fill them, walking under fire from the walls, because the alternative was the spear of the Mongol soldier directly behind them. When the moats were filled and the towers moved forward, the captives who had survived were pushed against the walls to absorb the arrows and boiling oil poured from above, while the Mongol engineers worked. Samarkand's garrison surrendered after 5 days. The captives who had been used against the walls were not freed. They were sorted again, their usefulness evaluated, and the ones still capable of labor were assigned to the next column, which would move toward the next city. This is what Juvayni meant by sparing Mongol soldiers. The arithmetic was straightforward. Every captive who died at the walls was a Mongol soldier who did not. The campaign losses were borne entirely by the people the Mongols had already conquered. Genghis Khan had understood from his earliest campaigns that skilled labor was the most valuable commodity a conquered population contained. More valuable than gold, which could be looted, or grain, which could be seized. A goldsmith could make more gold. A siege engineer could take more cities. A physician could keep the Khan's army functional across steppe terrain, thousands of kilometers from any permanent settlement. The extraction of skilled people from conquered populations was therefore the first and most carefully executed step of every Mongol conquest. Before the killing began in earnest, before the general distribution of captives, Mongol administrators moved through the assembled population with specific questions. Who among you is a blacksmith, a carpenter, a weaver, a physician? Who can read? Who can calculate? They were property of the Khan personally, to be marched east to Karakoram, the Mongol capital, or to whatever city the Khan was constructing or restoring. The march itself killed many of them. The route from Khwarezm to Mongolia covers more than 3,000 kilometers across some of the most hostile terrain on Earth: the Karakum Desert, the Pamir Mountains, the Gobi. Giovanni records that the columns of craftsmen were given minimal rations, that those who fell behind were killed by the rear guards to prevent them from being recaptured or escaping, and that the death rate during transport was substantial enough that Mongol administrators had begun accounting for it in their planning, requesting more craftsmen than they needed, on the assumption that a predictable percentage would not survive the journey. Women captured in conquest were assessed in the same administrative process that sorted craftsmen from labourers, soldiers from civilians. Those with identifiable skills, weaving, midwifery, literacy, were flagged for productive labour. The remainder were assigned to what Persian translators of Mongol administrative texts rendered as personal service, a phrase that required no elaboration for anyone who read it at the time and requires none now. Genghis Khan's personal household included hundreds of women acquired through conquest. Giovanni and Rashid al-Din both document this as administrative fact, recording it the way they recorded the number of horses in the Khan's stable or the quantity of silk in his treasury. The acquisition of women from defeated rulers was understood simultaneously as personal entitlement and political theatre. To hold the wife or daughter of a conquered king in your household was to extend his humiliation past his death. It was a statement made in flesh rather than stone. The Secret History records, in its characteristic tone of approving neutrality, that after the defeat of the Kurate tribe in 1203, the Khan took Ibaka Beki, daughter of the Kurate king, for himself, and distributed her sisters and the other women of the royal family among his generals as rewards for their loyalty. There is no record of what any of these women were told about their new situation. The Secret History did not consider this a detail worth preserving. What is documented is what happened to women who refused compliance. The Yasa provided no special category for them. A disobedient slave was a disobedient slave, regardless of gender, regardless of former status. The prescribed punishments, flogging, the kang, execution for repeated flight attempts, applied without distinction. Rubruk, whose account of the Mongol court is the most detailed eyewitness record in any European language, described the condition of enslaved women in the Khan's Ordu with a directness unusual for a 13th century monk. He noted that they worked without rest days, that they were responsible for the construction and dismantling of the felt gur tents every time the court moved, which was constantly. But this is not the worst thing Genghis Khan did to his war slaves. What happened to the people of Nishapur was worse than you could imagine. In April 1221, the Mongol army under Tolui, Genghis Khan's youngest son, took the city of Nishapur in what is now northeastern Iran. Nishapur had already surrendered once. Its population had negotiated terms, handed over supplies, opened its gates. It had then made the mistake of allowing a counterattack, during which Tokuchar, a Mongol general who was also Genghis Khan's son-in-law, was killed by an arrow fired from the city walls. Genghis Khan's daughter, Tokuchar's widow, asked to oversee the punishment personally. Tolui's army surrounded the city. The population was driven onto the plain outside the walls in the standard post-conquest procedure. Then the sorting that normally followed, craftsmen separated, soldiers evaluated, civilians divided, did not happen. According to multiple sources, including Giovanni and the historian Ibn al-Athir, Genghis Khan's daughter had made a specific request. No survivors, not one. The sources record that even the cats and dogs of the city were killed. What the sources record next is the detail that made Nishapur distinct in the catalogue of Mongol destructions. The bodies were separated by gender and by age. Men in one pile, women in another, children in a third. And the heads were removed and stacked into pyramids. 3 pyramids, organised by category, erected in the plain outside the ruined city. Giovanni gives the number of dead at 1,747,000. This figure is almost certainly inflated. It exceeds any reasonable estimate of Nishapur's population, but the pyramids themselves are attested by enough independent sources that historians treat them as historical fact. The separation of the dead by category, men, women, children, sorted even in death by the same administrative logic that had governed them in life, is recorded consistently across sources that had no contact with each other. The pyramids were not built by the Mongol soldiers. The early stages of the construction, before the scale of the killing made it impossible, were carried out by surviving captives brought forward from earlier conquests. the same men who had filled the moats at Samarkand, who had marched at the front of the columns between cities. They were made to stack the heads of the people of Nishapur before being killed themselves. Giovanni records this without apparent horror. He was, by the time he wrote it, an administrator in the Mongol government. He had learned the same lesson the goldsmith in Karakoram had learned. He had learned not to think of it.